To talk about the absolutely critical importance of freedom of the press and the public's right to know. It's how we make decisions everywhere. I see the media as a huge kitchen table that stretches across the globe, that we all sit around and debate and discuss the most important issues of the day: war and peace, life and death, and anything less than that is a disservice to a democratic society. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about where I originally come from. How many of you have ever heard of Democracy Now! And democracynow.org? That's fantastic, and for those of you who are not raising your hands, now you know. It's on 1,400 public television and radio stations around the United States and around the world. You can check it out at democracynow.org. It's a grassroots, global, unembedded, independent, international investigative news hour. Now, I originally began, though that's on television and radio, and we just did our broadcast today from UNESCO right before my talk. I originally began on Pacifica Radio, which was founded more than 60 years ago in Berkeley, California. A man who was a war resistor came out of the detention camps out of World War II and said there's got to be a media outlet that's not run by corporations that profit from war, but run by journalists and artists. And that's how Pacifica was born. The first station, KPFA in Berkeley, not run by corporations, as George Gerbner, the late dean of the Annenberg School of Communications at the University of Pennsylvania, would say, not run by corporations that have nothing to tell and everything to sell that are raising our children today. So the Pacifica Network was born. First station 1949 in Berkeley, California, then Los Angeles, 59, New York, my station in New York, WBAI, Washington, D.C., 1977, and KPFT in Houston. KPFT, Houston, Texas, where the hurricane just drowned that city, the Petro Metro. In 1970, when KPFT went on the air, within a few weeks, it's the only radio station in the United States whose transmitter was blown up. It was blown up by the Ku Klux Klan. When the radio station got back on their feet and rebuilt the transmitter, a few weeks later, the Klan strapped 10 times the dynamite to the base of the transmitter and blew it up again, right in the middle of Arlo Guthrie singing Alice's Restaurant, which I thought was a good song. But anyway, it took them months to get back on their feet, and when they did, all the media was there showing this station, this phoenix was rising from the ashes. In January of 1971, Arlo Guthrie came back in to finish his song on the air, and a KPFT has been broadcasting ever since. Now, I can't remember if it was the Grand Dragon or the Exalted Cyclops, because I often confuse their titles, the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan, but he said it was his proudest act. And I think that's because he understood how dangerous independent media is. Dangerous because it allows people to speak for themselves. And when you hear someone speaking from their own experience, whether it is a Palestinian child or an Israeli grandmother, whether it's a native elder in the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in North Dakota or an uncle in Afghanistan, you begin to understand where they are coming from. I didn't say agree with it. I mean, how often do we even agree with our family members? But you understand. It makes it much less likely that you'll want to destroy another person. It's that understanding that is the beginning of peace. I think the media can be the greatest force for peace on earth. Instead, all too often, it is wielded as a weapon of war, which is why we have to take the media back. Now, I come to you from the United States, where we recently had an election, and President Donald J. Trump is now the leader of the United States. But there are other leaders too, people all over the country who are resisting. And one of President Trump's main targets is the press right now, you may have heard. And he is attacking the press fiercely. He is naming names. He's talking about the failing New York Times and the fake news CNN. And the media is fighting back. We have rarely heard them sound so much like Democracy Now!, talking about how important the media is in assuring a democratic society. They do fight back, except when it comes to one issue. And this is where I think both the establishment and the establishment media must be challenged. Why we need independent media when it comes to war. When the United States bombed the Syrian airfield a few months ago, Brian Williams of MSNBC, not Fox, but the liberal network MSNBC, talked about the beauty of the bombs, and he quoted Leonard Cohen, the singer, who I think might have been rolling over in his grave. And Fareed Zakaria of CNN said he became president that night, President Trump, when President Trump dropped the largest non-nuclear bomb in the history of the world on Afghanistan, just a few weeks into office. It was developed under President Bush, George W. Bush. He didn't dare use it. The Pentagon calls it the Moab, the mother of all bombs. President Obama didn't dare use it. And then Trump, just in office a few weeks, he drops it inexplicably. It has a mile blast radius. And the media again said that Donald Trump had become president that night. The media tends to circle the wagons around the White House in times of war. This is when we need the media to be most independent, to hold those in power accountable, not only in the United States, but all over the world. When it comes to the issue of climate change, the networks in the United States are doing 24-hour coverage of these horrendous hurricanes, Hurricane Harvey in Houston, Hurricane Irma that's devastating the Caribbean, and now Hurricane Maria that has taken out Puerto Rico. The media does round-the-clock coverage, but almost never mentions climate change. They'll run severe weather, extreme weather. It flashes across the screen. What about those other two words? Global warming, global disruption, climate change. Now, I don't know if it's because every 5, 6, 7 minutes these networks, not only Fox, but CNN and MSNBC, they break to be brought to you by the American Petroleum Institute. When we cover war, we need a media that's not brought to you by the weapons manufacturers. When we cover climate change, we need a media that is not brought to you by the oil, the gas, the coal, the nuclear companies. When we cover healthcare, we need a media that's not brought to you by the insurance industry or big pharma, the drug companies. We need independent media, brought to you by viewers and readers and listeners, brought to you by you. This is the media that will save us. This is why independent media is so important. And we need a media that brings out the voices of the vast majority of people. All too often in the establishment media in the United States, you get this small circle of pundits who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and getting it so wrong. No, we need people from every walk of life, and I think it will reflect a very different sense for people in the rest of the world of who the people of the United States are. Because I really do think that those who care about war and peace, those who care about the growing inequality, not only in the United States but around the world, those who care about climate change, the fate of the planet, those who care about LGBTQ rights, those who care about racial justice and economic justice, are not a fringe minority, not even a silent majority, but the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media, which is why we have to take the media back, build our own media, and challenge the establishment media to open up, because it reaches so many people. It's so important. And that is a part of the whole fight for access to information. And that certainly goes to the internet. In all of the different struggles, it is absolutely key we have an open internet that people have access to all over the planet, and not let the telecoms, the telecommunications companies and the video companies, the large corporations write the legislation that would privatize this global resource that will equalize access to information for everyone. That is a global struggle that we must fight for. And in the United States, there is a very significant media and democracy movement. I wanted to end with just this image. For years, I covered East Timor, the tiny country 300 miles above Australia, but it was occupied by the Indonesian military for a quarter of a century. My colleague Ellen Nairn, a wonderful journalist, and I went to East Timor in 1990 and 1991 at the height of the killings. And on November 12, 1991, we survived a massacre. The Indonesian military marched up on, more than 1,000 Timorese who had walked to a cemetery to honor yet another one of the young Timorese who had been killed. And the military, armed with the US M16s, marched up, and without any warning, without any hesitation, without any provocation, they opened fire on the people and killed more than 250 of them. They took us down. We were very clearly journalists. I had my microphone in the air. Alan had his camera above his head. I took a photograph of the soldiers opening fire. They beat me to the ground, and then Alan threw himself on top of me to protect me from further injury. And they beat him with their US M16s until they fractured his skull. We laid there, and then in firing squad fashion, they put the guns to our heads. Ultimately, we think they took those guns away. They were demanding to know where we were from. And when I said America, America, we were from the same country their weapons were from. They would have to pay a price for killing us. They'd never had to pay for killing the Timorese. And they moved away. We were able to get to a hospital, and when we flew out of the country, clearly we were not able to stop this massacre just by our presence as Western journalists. When we flew out of the country, and we first went to a hospital, and the doctors and nurses started to cry when they saw us. We think because of how they view people in Western countries, in the industrialized world. They cried because I think we represent two things, and this is something for us all to consider. The sword and the shield. They see governments all too often representing the sword, using weapons or providing weapons to other governments to perform the killing. But they see the people of different countries, like the United States, as the shield. And in that case, that shield was bloodied, and it just deepened their despair. We got out of the country, we came back to the United States. In 1999, 8 years later, the UN sponsored a referendum for the people of East Timor, and they voted overwhelmingly for their freedom. And in 2002, they became one of the newest nations of the world, the Democratic Republic of East Timor. We were able to get into that ceremony. Late one night, 100,000 people in East Timor. And it was miraculous as the founding president got up and spoke in many languages. The people of East Timor, you could see the light reflected in their tear-stained faces of the fireworks display celebrating the new nation. And as I stood there that night, I thought, this remarkable people, they had resisted and they had won at an unacceptably high price, a third of their population killed, but they had won. And it really made me think, whether we are journalists or farmers, whether we're doctors, nurses, librarians, whether we are artists, whether we are employed or unemployed, we have a decision to make every hour of every day, and that is whether to represent the sword or the shield. Democracy Now!